I stood alone in the cold divorce mediation room. My soon-to-be ex-husband Marcus sat across from me looking incredibly smug. His mistress Chloe was right next to him, gently stroking his arm like she had just won a prize. To his left sat Bradley, his arrogant corporate lawyer who also happened to be his brother-in-law. Bradley sneered and tossed a printed bank statement across the heavy mahogany table. It slid to a stop right in front of me. He pointed at the bottom line and laughed out loud. $12. That is all you have to your name, Maya. You cannot even afford a public defender. The entire room seemed to vibrate with their shared amusement. What they did not know was that this $12 account was just the beginning of my trap. My name is Maya, and I am 34 years old. I spent 5 years building a life with a man who turned out to be a master manipulator. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed his life and his arrogant lawyer's career, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to sit quietly while toxic people dug their own graves. Now, let us get back to the mediation room. The air in the room was suffocating. Bradley leaned back in his expensive leather chair, adjusting his silk tie with a look of pure disgust on his pale face. He looked at me as if I was something he had scraped off the bottom of his shoe. He cleared his throat and opened his fancy leather briefcase, pulling out a stack of legal documents that he slammed onto the desk. "Let us be completely clear here, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are sitting here pro se, which means you are representing yourself because you are completely broke. My client Marcus has carried the financial weight of this marriage for half a decade. While he was out climbing the corporate ladder and providing a luxurious lifestyle, you were sitting at home playing business owner with that failed freelance consulting gig of yours. It is quite frankly pathetic, and we are not going to let you drain him any further." Marcus smirked and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked me up and down with absolute contempt. "I gave you everything, Maya," he said, shaking his head. "I paid the bills. I kept a roof over your head. And what did you do? You squandered it. You sent money to your family, and you pretended to be some big-shot entrepreneur. Now look at you, $12. It is embarrassing." Chloe giggled softly, pressing her shoulder against Marcus. She was wearing a designer dress that I recognized immediately, because it was charged to the credit card I was currently tracking. She tossed her long hair and gave me a pitying look. "You should just sign whatever they give you," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Marcus deserves peace, and you clearly need to go figure out how to get a real job." I kept my face completely blank. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked down at the bank statement highlighting the $12 balance. Bradley continued his rant, throwing around legal jargon to intimidate me. "Pursuant to the statutes of equitable distribution, we are prepared to offer you a walk-away deal," he proclaimed loudly. "Since you have contributed absolutely nothing of value to the marital estate, we are graciously allowing you to leave without pursuing you for spousal support. However, you will need to assume the $50,000 in marital credit card debt. Consider it a penalty for your financial negligence. It is a generous offer considering your lack of assets and your complete failure to generate any substantial income during the marriage." He pushed a pen across the table. It rolled and hit my folded hands. "Sign the papers, Maya," he demanded sharply. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. You have no leverage. You have no money. You have no legal representation. You are completely out of your league here, and if we take this to a judge, they will laugh you out of the courtroom." I slowly picked up the pen. The smooth, cool metal felt grounding against my skin. I looked at Bradley and then at Marcus. They were so confident in their victory. They were absolutely certain that they had cornered a helpless broke woman. They believed their own false narrative so deeply that they never once bothered to verify the actual facts. I smiled and started signing. I held the pen over the dotted line, but before the ink could even touch the paper, Bradley slapped his hand down on the second page. "Hold on a minute," he said, flashing a predatory grin. "Make sure you read paragraph 4, Maya. We are not just talking about you walking away from the house and the car. We are talking about the $50,000 balance on the joint platinum credit card. My eyes scanned the paragraph he was aggressively pointing at. The stipulation stated that I would assume 100% of the marital debt. I looked up at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. $50,000. I repeated, my voice steady. You want me to take on the entirety of the credit card debt while Marcus keeps the $400,000 equity in our home? Absolutely. Marcus cut in, leaning across the table, so his face was just inches from mine. His breath smelled like stale coffee and arrogance. You honestly think I am going to let you walk away free and clear after what you tried to pull? I know exactly where my money has been going, Maya. You thought you were so clever siphoning cash out of my accounts to send to your sick, broke mother in Chicago. Chloe gasped dramatically and covered her mouth with her manicured hand. Oh my God, Marcus, she whispered loudly. She was stealing from you to pay her mother's medical bills. That is so twisted. I am not a fool. Maya, Marcus continued, his voice echoing in the small, sterile room. I saw the bank transfers. Thousands of dollars just vanishing every month while I was out here working 60-hour weeks to keep a roof over our heads. You took advantage of my generosity for years. You treated me like a personal bank to fund your little family charity projects because your own freelance business is a complete joke. That is why I marched down to the bank and froze every single joint account we had. I cut you off completely. Bradley nodded approvingly, crossing his arms over his chest. My client took the necessary steps to protect his hard-earned assets from further misappropriation, he added, using his best courtroom voice. You are incredibly lucky we are not pressing criminal charges for financial fraud. Signing over the house and taking this $50,000 debt is a gift, Maya. It is the only way you get to walk out of here without handcuffs on. I set the pen down gently on the mahogany table and folded my hands in my lap. The sheer audacity of their lies was almost impressive. Marcus was putting on the performance of a lifetime, and his lawyer was eating it right up. They had constructed this entire narrative where I was the gold-digging villain and he was the hard-working victim. Marcus, I said, my tone calm and measured. We both know that is simply not true. I have never stolen a single dime from you. The money I sent to my mother in Chicago came from my own personal savings. And as for that $50,000 credit card balance, let us be honest about what those charges actually are. You used that card to buy the luxury watch currently sitting on your wrist. You used it to pay for your weekend golf trips to Miami with your friends. And unless I am mistaken, you also used it to buy the diamond tennis bracelet your mistress is currently wearing. Chloe instinctively covered her wrist with her other hand, her eyes darting nervously toward Marcus. Marcus just scowled, his face flushing a deep shade of angry red. He slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses rattle violently. Do not you dare try to spin this on me, he shouted. I earned that money. I bought those things because I deserve them. You contributed absolutely nothing to this marriage. You sat at home typing on your little laptop pretending to be some hotshot consultant while I paid every single bill. You are a leech, Maya. A leech who comes from nothing and has nothing. He was so proud of himself. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. He thought freezing the joint accounts with $12 left in them was his ultimate checkmate. He had no idea that I had stopped depositing my income into those accounts 3 years ago when I first noticed his questionable spending habits. He had no idea that my mother in Chicago was currently living in a fully paid-off condo that I bought for her in cash. I looked at Marcus and let him bask in his delusion. I let him believe his own lies. The trap was perfectly set. The heavy silence in the room stretched for a few seconds before Chloe decided it was her turn to take the stage. She shifted in her seat, leaning closer to Marcus, and intentionally rested her hand on his forearm. As she moved, the overhead fluorescent lights caught the brilliant sparkle of the diamond tennis bracelet circling her wrist. She made sure I was looking directly at it before she spoke. Her voice was dripping with that fake, sweet tone women use when they are trying to disguise their venom. You know, Maya, I really try not to get involved in the legal side of things, because that is Bradley's job, she said, waving her glittering wrist through the air. But sitting here listening to you try to play the victim is just exhausting. You are trying to make Marcus look like the bad guy, when the truth is you just could not keep up with him. He is a high-value man, and he needs a woman who actually matches his fly. You cannot expect a man like Marcus to stay tied down to a woman who is content with mediocrity. I looked at her taking in her carefully styled hair and the designer logo plastered across her handbag. She was a walking billboard for insecurity, masking itself as luxury. She scoffed and looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple black blazer and unbranded tote bag. I mean, look at you, Chloe continued, her lips curling into a condescending smirk. You are still clinging to that whole struggle-love mentality. You think suffering and wearing cheap clothes makes you noble or something? It does not, Maya. It just makes you look tired. Marcus works hard for his money, and he deserves to be surrounded by beautiful things and people who appreciate his success. You were just dragging him down. He needed an upgrade, and honestly, you should just accept that and move on instead of trying to guilt-trip him over credit card bills. Bradley chuckled softly in the background, clearly enjoying the show. Marcus puffed out his chest, looking incredibly pleased with his new girlfriend's vicious defense of his honor. I kept my posture perfectly straight and let a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. When I finally spoke, my voice was dangerously calm. You are absolutely right, Chloe, I said, keeping my eyes locked on hers. Marcus certainly does appreciate beautiful things, and he loves spending money to acquire them. That is a truly stunning bracelet you are wearing, by the way. The diamonds look flawless. Chloe preened, touching the stones with her manicured fingertips. Thank you, she said, her smirk widening. Marcus has excellent taste. He bought it for me last month to celebrate my promotion. He knows how to treat a real woman. I nodded slowly, leaning slightly across the table. It is beautiful, I repeated, letting my gaze drift from the bracelet up to her eyes. It is also incredibly familiar. In fact, I was reviewing some corporate expense reports just the other day, and I saw a very interesting charge. It was from a high-end jeweler downtown for that exact style of tennis bracelet. But the funny thing is, Marcus did not list it as a romantic gift for his girlfriend. He expensed it to his company account as a corporate appreciation gift for a female client. The smirk vanished from Chloe's face in an instant. Her hand dropped from the bracelet as if the diamonds had suddenly caught fire. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically toward Marcus. Marcus sat up completely rigid, his face draining of color. What are you talking about? Chloe whispered, her fake sweet tone completely gone. Marcus, tell her she is lying. You bought this for me with your own money, right? Bradley suddenly stopped smiling and sat forward in his chair. Watch what you say next, Maya, he warned, his voice tight. You are making baseless accusations about my client's professional conduct, and that borders on defamation. I ignored the lawyer and kept my focus entirely on the crumbling couple across from me. I am not making accusations, Bradley. I am simply stating a fact about a line item on an expense report. If Marcus used personal funds to buy his mistress jewelry, then he has nothing to worry about. But if he ran a $10,000 diamond bracelet through his corporate account and disguised it as a client gift, well, that would be a serious violation of company policy. Not to mention tax fraud. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. She pulled her arm off the table and hid her wrist in her lap. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Bradley slammed his hand down on the table to redirect the attention. We are not here to discuss my client's corporate spending habits, Bradley barked, his face turning red. We are here to finalize the division of marital assets. If you want to make wild accusations, try your luck in front of a judge, but I guarantee it will not end well for you. Sign the document right now, or we walk away and let the courts bury you in legal fees. I let out a long, heavy sigh and allowed my shoulders to slump. I looked down, letting my face show exhaustion and defeat. I needed them to think they had completely broken my spirit. You win, Marcus, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I am tired of fighting. I do not have the energy to drag this out in court. You can keep the house and the Mercedes. I will take the $50,000 debt. Just let me walk away. Marcus let out a breath of relief and leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. He exchanged a victorious look with Chloe. I knew you would come to your senses, Maya Marcus said, his tone dripping with fake pity. It is the smart thing to do. You always were slow on the uptake, but you got there in the end. Bradley tapped his pen impatiently. Good, he snapped. I will highlight where you need to initial. Wait, I said, holding up one hand. I will sign everything over to Marcus on one small condition. Bradley narrowed his eyes while Marcus let out an annoyed groan. What do you want now? Maya Marcus asked. I already told you I am not paying alimony. I do not want your money, I replied softly. I just want to keep sole ownership of my business, the limited liability company Apex Ventures. I want it explicitly stated in the final agreement that Marcus relinquishes all claims to that specific entity. Bradley paused, flipping rapidly through the financial disclosures. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and scanned it. A loud, barking laugh erupted from his chest. He tossed the paper toward Marcus. Are you kidding me? Bradley asked, wiping a tear from his eye. She wants to keep Apex Ventures. Marcus, look at this. The company has reported zero profits for the last 3 years. It is essentially a dead entity. There are no liquid assets tied to the account. It is just a shell for her failed dreams. Marcus looked at the paper and chuckled, shaking his head. You want to keep a worthless business that makes absolutely no money? He asked, staring at me like I was an idiot. You are taking on $50,000 in debt to hold on to a vanity project. You really are a terrible businesswoman, Maya. No wonder you could never contribute to our household. It is all I have left, I said, keeping my voice fragile. It is the only thing I built with my own hands. Please, Marcus, just let me keep it. Bradley leaned over and whispered loudly, Let her have it. It is worthless, and makes her feel like she won something. Sign the addendum before she realizes she is walking into a financial trap. She is taking the debt and giving you the house. Do not let her change her mind. Marcus grabbed his pen and quickly scribbled his signature on the modified agreement. He pushed the paperwork across the table with a triumphant smirk. Fine, he said. Keep your little company. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you are paying off my credit card bills. I picked up the pen and signed my name on every single page. I handed the stack back to Bradley, who snatched it away eagerly. We are done here, Bradley said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I stood up slowly, gathering my cheap tote bag, and walked out of the mediation room without looking back. I kept my head down, playing the broken woman, all the way down the long hallway. I stepped into the empty elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The heavy metal doors slid shut, sealing me inside. As soon as the elevator began to descend, my fragile facade melted away completely. I looked up at my reflection in the mirrored doors, and a cold, predatory smile spread across my face. They thought Apex Ventures was a worthless shell company. They had no idea they just signed away their entire future. I pulled my cell phone from my jacket pocket and typed out a quick message to my private wealth manager. The game has begun. I drove straight from the courthouse back to the house in the suburbs. The sprawling 4-bedroom property was quiet when I walked through the front door. I immediately went upstairs to the master bedroom and began packing my things into 2 large suitcases. I was folding my clothes when I heard the heavy oak front door swing open downstairs, followed by a chorus of loud, obnoxious laughter. I froze, listening to the familiar voices echoing through the foyer. It was Mama Joyce, my mother-in-law, and Sarah, my sister-in-law. And right underneath their booming voices was the high-pitched giggle of Chloe. The ink on the mediation papers was barely dry, and Marcus had already sent his family and his mistress to claim the territory like a pack of hungry wolves, fighting over a fresh piece of meat they thought I had left behind for them to eagerly consume. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. The 3 of them were standing in the middle of my living room holding expensive iced coffees. Chloe had a brightly colored tape measure in her hand. She walked right past the photos of Marcus and me that were still hanging on the wall and approached the large bay windows. These curtains are hideous, Chloe announced, extending the tape measure across the glass. They block out the natural light, and the fabric looks incredibly cheap. We need something lighter, maybe a sheer linen, to open up the space. Mama Joyce nodded vigorously, sipping her drink. You are so right, baby, Mama Joyce said, patting Chloe's shoulder. Marcus always complained about how dark this house felt. I told him he needed a woman with actual taste to make this place feel like a home. I slowly descended the stairs, my footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. Excuse me? I said, my voice slicing through their conversation. What exactly do you think you are doing? The three of them turned to look at me, completely unbothered by my presence. Sarah rolled her eyes and crossed her arms over her chest. Oh, please, Maya, do not act so dramatic, Sarah scoffed. Marcus called us the second you signed the papers. This is not your house anymore, so you have no right to tell anyone what to do. Chloe ignored me and continued measuring the window frame, jotting down numbers on her phone. Listen, Maya, while you are packing your bags, make sure you scrub the master bathroom, Chloe said without looking in my direction. I am moving my things in this weekend, and I am a severe germaphobe. I do not want to find any of your cheap hair products or stray hairs left behind. Treat it like a final cleaning service since you owe Marcus so much money anyway. My hands curled into fists at my sides. The sheer disrespect was staggering. You are not moving in today, and you are certainly not ordering me around in my own house, I fired back, stepping into the living room. Legally, I have 30 days to vacate the premises. Until I hand those keys over to Marcus, this is still my home and none of you are welcome here. Get out right now. Mama Joyce stepped forward, placing herself between me and Chloe like a shield. She pointed a manicured finger aggressively in my face. Do not you dare raise your voice at us in my son's house, she yelled, her eyes wide with fury. You are nothing but a guest here now, Maya. An unwanted guest. You signed the papers because you knew you were bleeding my boy dry. You should be down on your knees thanking us for letting you pack your trash instead of throwing it out on the front lawn ourselves. Sarah stepped up beside her mother, raising her voice. You are just bitter because Marcus finally found a real woman who actually works and contributes, Sarah yelled, waving her hands dismissively. Chloe smiled smugly from the window. It is fine, Mama Joyce, let her throw her little tantrum, Chloe said sweetly. She is just jealous because she has to go back to the ghetto while I get to live in luxury. I looked at them standing there so proud in a house they thought they had stolen. You really think you won? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. You think bullying me out of this house makes you winners? Sarah laughed. We did win, Maya, she spat. Look around. You have nothing left. I turned my back on them and walked toward the stairs. Do not forget the bathroom, Chloe called out after me, laughing loudly. I kept walking, my mind already calculating the exact moment I would watch their entire world burn. I reached the top of the stairs and walked back into the master bedroom, pulling my second suitcase onto the bed. I could hear their heavy footsteps following me up the wooden staircase. They were not going to let me pack in peace. They wanted an audience for their victory lap. Mama Joyce appeared in the doorway first, crossing her arms and leaning against the frame. Sarah stood right behind her, peering over her shoulder with a nasty grin. Chloe sauntered in past them, acting as if she already owned the space. Mama Joyce watched me fold a sweater and shook her head in exaggerated pity. You know, Maya, I told Marcus from the very first day he brought you home to meet us that you were a mistake. I looked at him and I said, Son, why are you bringing home a fatherless girl with 6 figures of student loans when you have the whole world at your feet? You came from nothing, Maya. Your mother was a struggling single parent who lived paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment in Chicago, and you brought all of that broke energy into my son's life. You never knew what it was like to be part of a real family with legacy and wealth. You just latched onto my boy because you saw a meal ticket out of the struggle. I did not stop folding my clothes. I placed the sweater into my suitcase and picked up a pair of jeans. I let her words fill the room, knowing that responding would only give her the satisfaction she desperately craved. Sarah chimed in, stepping out from behind her mother. That is the truth, Sarah said, pointing a finger at me. You always acted like you were so much better than us with your little freelance consulting business, but we all knew Marcus was footing the bill for your pretend lifestyle. You were a leech, Maya. A complete leech. Mama Joyce nodded, turning her attention to Chloe, who was now inspecting the walk-in closet. Now you look at Chloe. Mama Joyce said, her voice suddenly softening into a sickeningly sweet tone. Chloe comes from a good family. Both of her parents are respected professionals. She has a master's degree in marketing, and she actually contributes to society. She is not sitting at home draining her husband's bank account to pay off debts she accumulated before they even met. Chloe is an asset, Maya. You were just a heavy burden dragging my son down. Chloe turned around from the closet and smiled modestly. Thank you, Mama Joyce, Chloe said, batting her eyelashes. I just think a marriage should be an equal partnership. Marcus is such a high-value man, and he needs someone who understands how to navigate his world. My parents taught me the importance of financial literacy and ambition. It is honestly just sad that Maya never had a father figure to teach her those basic life skills. She probably just did not know any better. The audacity was breathtaking. They were standing in a house that I had personally funded the down payment for, lecturing me about financial literacy. They were praising a woman who was actively participating in marital fraud, and praising her pedigree while insulting the mother who broke her back to raise me. My mother worked double shifts at a diner to make sure I had everything I needed, and she raised a daughter who built an empire in silence. Chloe had a piece of paper that Marcus paid for, and an attitude financed by stolen credit cards. Mama Joyce took a step closer to the bed, her eyes burning with generational venom. I prayed every night that Marcus would wake up and see the light. Mama Joyce continued, her voice rising with righteous indignation. I prayed he would realize that you cannot turn a street rat into a swan. You can put designer clothes on you and move you into a nice suburban neighborhood, but you will always be that desperate little girl from Chicago trying to hustle your way to the top. You thought you could trap him. You thought if you just played the quiet, obedient wife, he would keep paying your bills forever. But my son is smart. He cut his losses before you could bankrupt him completely. Now you have to go back to the bottom where you belong. I zipped the first suitcase shut with a loud sound that instantly cut through her monologue. I looked up and met Mama Joyce directly in her eyes. I did not flinch or look away from them. I let her see the absolute coldness hiding in my stare. Keep talking, I thought to myself. Keep digging that hole much deeper. None will survive. You have a lot to say about my mother, Mama Joyce, I said, stepping away from the bed and closing the distance between us. My voice was dangerously low, forcing her to stop leaning against the doorframe and stand up straight. My mother worked 2 jobs so I would not have to rely on a man to validate my existence. She taught me how to stand on my own 2 feet. What exactly did you teach your son? Did you teach him how to lie? Or did he learn that from his father? Mama. Joyce stiffened, her eyes narrowing. Do not you dare bring my late husband into this, she warned, her voice shaking with sudden fury. He was a great man. He was a pillar of the community. A pillar of the community, I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. Is that what we are calling it now? Because the way I remember it, he spent 20 years of your marriage funding a completely separate household across town. He had a whole other family, Mama Joyce. And you knew about it. You sat in the front pew at church every Sunday wearing your big hats and your fake smiles, pretending everything was perfect, while he humiliated you in front of the entire neighborhood. You stayed with a man who treated you like an option because you were too terrified of losing your comfortable lifestyle to demand basic respect. Shut your mouth, Maya, Sarah screamed, stepping forward as if she was going to hit me. You do not know anything about our family. I know everything. I fired back, glaring at Sarah until she backed down. I know that your mother is standing in my bedroom right now, projecting decades of her own unhealed trauma onto me. You hate me, Mama Joyce, because I am not doing what you did. I am not turning a blind eye to your son's infidelity. I am not shrinking myself to protect his fragile ego. You look at me, and you see the courage you never had. You praise Chloe because she is just like you. A woman willing to accept the absolute bare minimum from a man, as long as it comes with a platinum credit card and a nice suburban house. Mama Joyce let out a high-pitched shriek of absolute outrage. Her hands flew to her chest, and her face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You ungrateful little wretch!" she screamed, spit flying from her lips. "How dare you speak to me that way in my son's house? I am going to make sure you have nothing. I am going to see you on the streets." Before I could deliver the final blow, a heavy clanking sound echoed from the hallway downstairs. Heavy boots thumped on the wooden steps. A moment later, a man in a blue work shirt carrying a heavy metal toolbox appeared in the doorway right behind Chloe. "Right this way, Jim," Chloe said brightly, pointing past Mama Joyce and Sarah. "I need the locks on this bedroom door completely replaced. And after you finish up here, we will go downstairs and do the front and back doors. I want high-security deadbolts on everything. I cannot have unauthorized people sneaking back in to steal my things." The locksmith looked past the three women and locked eyes with me, standing next to my half-packed suitcases. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, clearly realizing he had just walked into the middle of a massive domestic dispute. "Excuse me, Mom," he said, looking at Chloe. "Is this property vacant? Because my company policy is pretty strict about changing locks during an active eviction or dispute." Chloe waved her hand dismissively, her diamond bracelet catching the light again. "Ignore her, Jim. She is just the ex-wife grabbing the last of her trash. My boyfriend owns this house, and he is paying you double your emergency weekend rate to get this done right now." I stepped forward, pushing past Sarah and Mama Joyce, who were still seething. "Jim," I said, addressing the man directly and keeping my tone completely professional. "My name is Maya, and I am legally a resident of this property. The divorce agreement was signed less than an hour ago, and I have 30 days to vacate. If you change these locks while my belongings are inside, you will be participating in an illegal lockout. I will immediately call the police, and I will name your company in the civil lawsuit I am preparing now." The locksmith's eyes widened in fear. He immediately set his toolbox down and took a step backward. "Whoa, lady," he said, holding up both his hands. "I do not want any trouble. I am just here to do a simple job." The locksmith picked up his heavy metal toolbox and backed out of the bedroom. "I am not getting involved in a legal dispute over a marital property," he said, shaking his head. "You people need to figure this out with the courts before you call me again." Chloe shrieked and stomped her foot, demanding he stay, but the man was already hurrying down the stairs. Mama Joyce crossed her arms and glared at me. "You think you are so smart, Maya," she sneered. "You think you can just delay the inevitable, but you are completely out of options." Just as the front door slammed shut behind the fleeing locksmith, heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer. A familiar, arrogant voice carried up the staircase. "What is going on up here, and why did I just see a contractor running to his van?" Bradley appeared in the doorway, looking out of breath, but entirely too pleased with himself. He had rushed over straight from the courthouse, still wearing his expensive tailored suit. He stepped into the room and immediately positioned himself in front of Mama Joyce and Chloe, puffing out his chest like a brave knight defending his kingdom. Bradley surveyed the room and locked his eyes on my half-packed suitcases. He let out a loud, dramatic sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Maya, we literally just left the mediation room," he said, using that incredibly condescending tone he reserved specifically for me. "My client was generous enough to let you gather your cheap belongings, but you are clearly abusing his kindness. You are causing a disturbance and harassing his family. I am going to have to ask you to close your bags and leave the premises immediately before things get very ugly for you today." I did not stop what I was doing at all. I grabbed the last stack of clothes from the dresser and placed them neatly into the suitcase. "I am not going anywhere until my bags are packed and my arranged transportation arrives," I replied calmly. "And as I just explained to the locksmith, I have 30 days to vacate this property under state law." Bradley took a sudden, aggressive step forward. He invaded my personal space, standing so close I could smell his strong cologne. He looked down his nose at me, trying to use his height for physical intimidation. "You do not get to cite state law to me, you arrogant little woman," Bradley hissed, his face turning red with anger. "I am an attorney. I know exactly what the law says, and I know how to use it against people like you. The agreement you signed transferred full ownership of this property to Marcus, effective immediately. By remaining here against the wishes of the rightful owner and his designated guests, you are committing criminal trespass. I will call the police right now and have you dragged out of here in handcuffs if you do not leave immediately today." Chloe smiled triumphantly and leaned against the doorframe. "Do it, Bradley," she cheered. "Call the cops and let them holler away. It will be hilarious." Mama Joyce nodded in agreement, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "Show her what happens when she disrespects my family, Bradley. She needs to learn her place." Bradley pulled his brand new cell phone from his suit pocket and held it up, waving it in my face. "This is your final warning, Maya," he threatened. "Leave right now or I am dialing emergency services and reporting a hostile intruder inside the house today." I looked at the phone and then looked directly into his angry eyes. I did not flinch at all. I did not step back. I simply reached down, grabbed the heavy zipper of my suitcase, and pulled it shut with a loud, sharp sound that echoed in the tense room. I stood up straight and faced him squarely. "Go ahead and call them, Bradley," I said, my voice completely steady. "Call the police. But while they are on their way, you might want to call whichever cereal company gave you your law degree inside one of their cardboard cereal boxes, because any real lawyer would know that a signed mediation agreement is not a finalized court order until a judge actually signs it. Even if it was finalized, state eviction laws require a formal 30-day written notice before anyone can be legally removed from a primary residence. If you call the police, they will tell you this is a civil matter. And if you try to forcefully remove me, they will arrest you for assault. So please dial the number. I would love to watch a supposed legal expert explain his profound ignorance to a uniformed police officer." Bradley froze, completely stiff. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I did not wait for him to find his voice. I grabbed my 2 suitcases and pushed past him. I walked down the hallway and headed straight for the stairs. Mama Joyce and Sarah stood on the landing. They stepped aside when they saw my eyes. I maneuvered my luggage down the wooden staircase, keeping my steps deliberate and steady. I was not going to run. I was not going to let them see me sweat. I reached the bottom floor and walked straight toward the heavy oak front door. Behind me, Bradley frantically whispered to reassure his family. He was making up some new excuse about giving me a break. I pushed the front door open and stepped into the sunlight. The warm air hit my face, and I took a deep breath of freedom. A beat-up silver sedan pulled into the driveway. It was the Uber I had requested right after leaving the courthouse. The car had a dented door and peeling paint. It was exactly the kind of car my arrogant in-laws would despise. Right on cue, the front door swung open again. Marcus had apparently arrived while I was upstairs packing. He stepped out onto the wide front porch, surrounded by his mother, his sister, his lawyer, and his mistress. They stood together like a royal family surveying their kingdom. Marcus pointed at the dented silver car and let out a loud, booming laugh. "Is that your royal carriage, Maya?" he shouted, his voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. "Try not to get tetanus on your way back to the slums." Chloe giggled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "Make sure you give the driver 5 stars for picking up trash," she yelled. I loaded my suitcases into the trunk of the car and closed it firmly. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. I looked back at the porch one last time. They were all smiling and laughing, completely intoxicated by their perceived victory. They thought they had successfully discarded me. I gave them a polite nod and slid into the back seat of the car. I closed the door, shutting out their cruel laughter, and gave the driver the address to a luxury downtown hotel they knew nothing about. As the car pulled away from the curb, I reached into my bag and pulled out my cell phone. The fragile, helpless persona I had maintained for the last hour was officially retired. I unlocked my screen and dialed a private number. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Good afternoon, Miss Maya," the voice said. "I assume the mediation went exactly as planned." "Yes, David, it went perfectly, I replied, keeping my tone strictly business. Marcus signed the agreement. He assumed full liability for the debt, and he officially renounced any and all claims to Apex Ventures. David let out a low chuckle. Excellent news, he said. Shall I initiate the next phase? Yes, I said, looking out the window as we merged onto the highway. Unseal the financial records for the holding company and notify the board of directors that I am officially stepping back in as majority shareholder. And David, make sure our legal team prepares the eviction notices for all residential properties under our corporate umbrella. I will have them drafted and ready by tomorrow morning, he promised. I ended the call and opened a secure browser window on my phone. I navigated directly to the official website for the Internal Revenue Service. I clicked on the portal for reporting suspected tax fraud and corporate embezzlement. The form asked for specific details regarding the alleged financial misconduct. I began typing with rapid precision. I detailed how Marcus was using his corporate expense account to purchase luxury items, including a $10,000 diamond tennis bracelet. I provided the exact dates of the transactions, the name of the jewelry store, and the specific corporate tax identification number he used to write off the purchases as business expenses. I also included details about his secret transfers to a fraudulent trust account. I reviewed the information one last time, making sure every single detail was perfectly accurate and legally actionable. They wanted to play a game of financial ruin, and I was more than happy to oblige. I hit the submit button and watched the confirmation screen load completely on my device. A small confirmation number appeared verifying that the anonymous tip had been successfully received by the federal agency. I locked my phone and leaned back against the headrest. The family was probably still celebrating on that front porch, completely oblivious to the storm gathering right above their heads. The first domino was pushed. 2 weeks passed in the blink of an eye. The first Saturday of June arrived, bringing the sweltering summer heat and the perfect excuse for a massive family celebration. Marcus hosted a huge Juneteenth cookout at the house he stole from me. He paraded his victory in front of the entire extended family. From my luxury suite downtown, I received live updates about the party through a neighborhood group chat that Sarah foolishly forgot to remove me from. The neighbors complained about the loud classic rhythm and blues music shaking the windows of the houses. In the sprawling backyard of my former home, the scene was a picture of stolen bliss. The patio was decorated with expensive string lights and fresh floral arrangements that Chloe charged to Marcus. Extended family members from all over the state had gathered. Uncles were sitting around a foldable table, slamming down dominoes and arguing loudly over a game of spades. Aunts were relaxing in expensive wicker patio furniture, holding plastic cups filled with dark liquor and sweet tea. Right in the center of the yard, standing over my custom-built stainless steel grill, was Bradley. Bradley was wearing a ridiculous floral apron over his expensive polo shirt, flipping cuts of meat while holding court. He held a cold beer in one hand, using his metal tongs to emphasize his exaggerated story about the divorce mediation. "You should have seen her face," Bradley boasted loudly, his voice carrying over the music. I slid that bank statement right across the table. $12. That is all the arrogant little freelancer had to her name. 12 pathetic dollars. Uncle George, a man who had borrowed money from Marcus twice in the last year, laughed loudly and slapped his knee. "You are kidding me," George said. "She always walked around here acting like she owned the world with her little laptop and her quiet attitude. I always knew she was hiding a broke bank account behind that fake confidence." Bradley flipped a heavy rack of ribs and smirked. "Oh, it gets better," Bradley continued, leaning in closely to the group of uncles and cousins. "She tried to play hardball. She tried to act like she had leverage, but I shut that down immediately. I told her she was either taking the $50,000 credit card debt or I was going to bury her so deep in legal fees she would never see daylight again. You would not believe how fast she signed over the deed to this house. She practically begged to keep some worthless zero-profit shell company just to save her bruised ego. I let her have it, of course. It was like throwing a bone to a starving stray dog." The group of men erupted into laughter, clinking their glass bottles together. Marcus strolled out onto the patio just as the laughter peaked. He was wearing designer sunglasses and a crisp white linen shirt, looking every bit the wealthy suburban king he pretended to be. Chloe trailed right behind him, carrying a massive tray of catered appetizers. She was wearing a matching white sundress, her diamond tennis bracelet, catching the bright afternoon sun for everyone to admire. Marcus wrapped his arm around Chloe's waist and pulled her close, beaming with pride. "All right, everyone, listen up," Marcus shouted over the music, waving his hand to get the attention of the sprawling crowd. The music volume dipped slightly as Mama Joyce stood up from her VIP seat in the shade, clapping her hands together enthusiastically. "I want to make a toast," Marcus announced, holding up his crystal glass. "First of all, thank you all for coming to my home to celebrate. It has been a rough few months dealing with dead weight, but as you can see, I have finally upgraded my life." The crowd cheered and whistled, and I especially want to toast to my beautiful woman Chloe. Marcus continued kissing her cheek. "Not only has she brought peace back into my house, but she is officially up for the regional director promotion at the firm next week. We are looking at a massive salary bump and a corner office. To Chloe and to my new life." Mama Joyce raised her cup high into the air, her face glowing with absolute triumph. "To my smart, handsome son and his beautiful, educated woman," she yelled over the crowd. "Good riddance to the past and hello to the future." The entire backyard erupted in cheers, raising their glasses and cups. They drank to their perceived success, and they drank to my supposed ruin. They were completely unaware that every expensive piece of meat they were eating, every drop of premium liquor they were drinking, and the very ground they stood on was about to be ripped away. The celebration continued at full volume for another hour before the first real problem emerged. Uncle George walked to the makeshift outdoor bar and picked up an empty bottle of premium scotch, turning it upside down. Not a single drop was left. The coolers were entirely empty of champagne and the expensive tequila was gone. Marcus, wanting to maintain his flawless image as the ultimate provider, immediately waved his hand dismissively. He pulled out his smartphone and loudly announced that he was having a special emergency restock delivered from an exclusive liquor boutique. He promised everyone vintage champagne. 30 minutes later, a black delivery van pulled into the circular driveway. Marcus smiled and strutted toward the front of the house. Chloe immediately grabbed his arm, following closely beside him, making sure everyone on the patio was watching. She wanted the entire family to see how much money her man would spend on a whim to keep her party going. The delivery driver opened the back doors and began unloading heavy wooden crates filled with top-tier bottles. He stacked them neatly on the front porch and pulled out a digital payment tablet. "The total comes to exactly $2,850, sir," the driver said, holding out the device. Marcus did not even blink. He reached into his designer wallet and pulled out his heavy corporate black card. He flipped it between his fingers so the sunlight could catch the metallic edge before handing it over. "Swipe that and add a $200 tip for your fast service," Marcus said, puffing out his chest. Chloe beamed with pride, leaning her head against his shoulder. The driver inserted the card into the digital reader. The machine processed for a few seconds before emitting a sharp, harsh beep. The screen flashed bright red. The driver looked down at the tablet and frowned. "I am sorry, sir, but this card has been declined," he said politely. Marcus let out a short, annoyed sigh and shook his head. "It is probably just a standard fraud alert," he said, waving his hand. "The bank sees a large weekend purchase, and they freeze it for my protection. Just run the card one more time." The driver nodded and inserted the metal card again. The machine processed and then beeped sharply a second time. Another bright red screen. "It is completely declined, sir." The driver repeated, his tone growing a bit impatient. "I cannot release these crates without a successful authorization." Chloe immediately dropped her hand from Marcus and stepped back. Her smile completely vanished. She looked over her shoulder at the patio where several aunts and uncles were now openly staring at them from the side gate. "Marcus, what is going on?" Chloe hissed, her voice tight with sudden embarrassment. "You promised everyone the vintage champagne for my promotion toast. Why is your card declining in front of your entire family? Do you have any idea how humiliating this makes me look? Fix this right now." Marcus felt a sudden rush of heat crawl up the back of his neck. He forced a smile and quickly pulled out his personal platinum backup card. "It is fine, baby," he whispered frantically. "The corporate account probably just got locked because of the holiday weekend. I will use my personal card." He snatched the black card from the driver and handed over the silver platinum card. The driver swiped it without a word. The machine beeped a third time, declined. The red light flashed brightly in the afternoon sun, reflecting off the polished wooden crates. Panic finally pierced through the arrogant fog in his mind. The platinum card had a $50,000 limit. It should have been completely clear. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic groan and stomped her foot on the pavement. "Are you kidding me right now?" she yelled, not caring who heard her. "You brought me out here to show off and you cannot even pay for drinks. You are making me look like a fool." Marcus quickly turned around and let out a booming, artificial laugh, projecting his voice toward the backyard so the family would hear him. "Wow, these bank security measures are getting absolutely ridiculous," he yelled, forcing a wide grin. "They froze all my accounts thinking my wallet was stolen." "Hold on just 1 minute, folks." He turned back to the driver, his face pale and slick with sudden cold sweat. "Leave the boxes right here," he ordered in a hushed, panicked voice. "Let me go inside and call my bank to clear this up. It will only take 2 minutes. He did not wait for an answer. He turned and rushed into the house, leaving Chloe standing alone on the driveway. The facade was finally cracking. Marcus sprinted through the long hallway of the house, ignoring the loud music and the family cheering in the backyard. He pushed past the wooden door of his home office and slammed it shut, locking the deadbolt behind him. The sudden silence was deafening compared to the party outside. He leaned against the door, pressing his palms against the cool wood, trying to slow his racing heartbeat. This was impossible. He made over $200,000 a year. He was wealthy. He pushed himself away from the door and rushed over to his large mahogany desk. He threw himself into his leather chair and grabbed his cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the device on the desk before snatching it back up. He dialed the direct emergency line for his corporate accounting department. It was a Saturday, but executives had access to a 24-hour financial liaison. The phone rang 3 times before a stern voice answered. "Corporate finance, this is Richard speaking." "Richard, it is Marcus," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, but failing miserably. "I am hosting a major client event at my home right now, and my corporate black card just declined at the door. I need you to lift whatever security hold the bank put on it immediately. It is extremely embarrassing and I have people waiting." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched out, making Marcus feel sick to his stomach. "Marcus, I cannot do that," Richard finally said, his tone completely devoid of its usual friendly warmth. "The bank did not place a security hold on your account. The board of directors did. Your corporate card has been suspended indefinitely." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Suspended, he repeated, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about, Richard? I am the regional director of sales. I have unrestricted expense privileges. You cannot just suspend my account on a holiday weekend without notifying me." "I am just following orders," Richard replied coldly. First thing yesterday morning, the parent company initiated a massive surprise forensic audit across all branch offices. A team of external auditors arrived with a court order and seized every single financial record from the past 3 years. They are scrutinizing every expense report, every client gift, and every vendor invoice. Until the audit is completely finished, all executive discretionary accounts are frozen by direct order of the majority shareholder. The words hit Marcus like a physical punch to the chest. A forensic audit. They were going through the expense reports. His mind instantly flashed to the $10,000 diamond tennis bracelet he had bought for Chloe. He had coded it in the system as a luxury appreciation gift for a top-tier female client in Seattle. If the auditors actually called that client to verify the gift, his entire career would be over. He would be fired for gross embezzlement. "Richard, you have to help me," Marcus pleaded, gripping the edge of the desk. You know how these expense accounts work. We all bend the rules sometimes to get things done. Is there any way you can unlock it just for today? I will pay back whatever the auditors flag next week. I just need liquidity right now. I cannot help you, Marcus, Richard said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They already flagged several of your transactions. They have red flagged the jewelry, the Miami hotel rooms, and a series of strange cash withdrawals. I would suggest you find a very good defense lawyer because Human Resources is preparing to call you in on Monday morning. The line went completely dead. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the blank screen of his phone. He dropped the device and frantically opened his laptop, logging into his personal banking portal. He stared at the screen in pure horror. The joint accounts he had frozen still only had $12 in them. His personal checking account was completely empty because he had transferred all his cash into the fake trust fund during the divorce mediation. His platinum credit card was maxed out at exactly $50,000. He was broke. He pulled open his desk drawer, grabbing a stack of mail. He ripped open the envelopes with trembling fingers. The first was the mortgage statement demanding a massive payment by the first of the month. The second was an invoice from Bradley's law firm. Bradley bragged about offering free legal help, but the invoice demanded $15,000 in hidden fees. Marcus had no way to pay the mortgage. He had no way to pay his brother-in-law. And Chloe was standing outside waiting for expensive champagne he could no longer afford. While Marcus was trapped inside his office, suffocating under the weight of his collapsing financial reality, Chloe was left standing alone on the sunlit driveway. She stared at the delivery driver and the stack of wooden crates, her face burning with humiliation. The aunts and uncles leaning against the side gate were whispering and pointing. Chloe knew she had to regain control of the narrative before the family started questioning Marcus and his wealth. She pasted a bright fake smile on her face and waved dismissively at the driver, telling him they would sort out the banking error shortly. She turned on her heel and strutted back toward the backyard, grabbing a plastic cup of cheap fruit punch from a cooler, since the premium liquor was completely gone. Just as she prepared to make an excuse to the crowd, a sleek black town car pulled smoothly up to the wrought iron security gate at the front of the property. The heavy engine purred quietly before shutting off. The tinted back window rolled down and the passenger door opened. Maya stepped out onto the pristine pavement. She was holding a thick manila envelope and wore a neutral expression. She did not look like a defeated woman who had just been evicted 2 weeks prior. She was wearing a simple tailored beige linen trouser and a matching silk blouse. There were no flashy logos or oversized jewelry to catch the eye. Chloe spotted Maya from the patio, and her eyes lit up with malicious glee. This was the perfect distraction. Chloe could humiliate the broke ex-wife and remind everyone who the new queen of the castle was. Chloe marched down the long paved driveway, her heels clicking loudly against the concrete. She held her plastic cup like a royal scepter, making sure her diamond tennis bracelet caught the sunlight. Several family members, including Sarah and Mama Joyce, followed closely behind her, eager to watch the drama unfold. Maya stood patiently at the closed gate, her hands resting casually by her sides. She watched Chloe approach like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. "What are you doing here, Maya?" Chloe shouted before she even reached the gate. "Are you seriously stalking us now? You are not invited to this party and you are definitely not getting back inside this house. I told you to take your trash and leave 2 weeks ago. Why are you showing up here embarrassing yourself in front of Marcus and his entire family?" Maya did not raise her voice. She simply held up the thick manila envelope. "I am not here for your party, Chloe," Maya said, her tone perfectly even. "I am here to deliver mandatory financial disclosure forms that Bradley completely forgot to file with the court. If these are not signed and returned by Monday, the judge will hold him in contempt. I figured since he is such a brilliant legal mind, he would want to fix his amateur mistake before he loses his license to practice law." Chloe scoffed and rolled her eyes, taking a sip from her plastic cup. "You are so pathetic," Chloe sneered, leaning against the heavy iron gate. You could have mailed those papers. You just wanted an excuse to come here and see what you are missing. You wanted to see Marcus treating me like a queen. Well, look around, Maya. We are drinking premium liquor, eating expensive food, and celebrating my massive corporate promotion. You are standing on the wrong side of the fence, wearing an outfit that looks like it came from a discount rack at a local thrift store. Mama Joyce and Sarah reached the gate just in time to hear the insult. They erupted into loud, cackling laughter. Sarah pointed at Maya's simple beige trousers. Seriously, Maya, Sarah mocked. You could have at least dressed up if you were going to crash a high-class event. You look like you are about to ask us for spare change. You really have zero class. Maya looked down at her clothes and then back up at the three women laughing at her. She did not bother explaining that her simple linen trousers and silk blouse were custom-tailored pieces from an exclusive Italian design house that cost more than Chloe's entire wardrobe combined. She did not tell them that true wealth whispers, while fake wealth screams. Instead, Maya offered a small pitying smile. I suppose my outfit is a bit understated, Maya agreed smoothly. But then again, I do not need to wear flashy logos to prove my worth, and I certainly do not need to rely on a stolen corporate credit card to buy a diamond bracelet just to feel important. The loud mocking laughter abruptly stopped. Chloe's smug face drained of all color instantly. I did not wait for any of them to formulate a response to my words. I simply kept my eyes fixed forward, waiting for the man of the hour to arrive. A few seconds later, Marcus finally emerged from the front door of the house and began walking quickly down the driveway. He looked absolutely terrible. He was sweating profusely, and his expensive white linen shirt was damp with nervous perspiration. The arrogant, confident stride he possessed just a few minutes ago was completely gone. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. Marcus reached the heavy iron gate and completely ignored the tense standoff happening between his family and me. He grabbed the iron bars and looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. Maya, what are you doing here? He hissed, his voice barely above a frantic whisper. You need to leave right now. You are causing a scene and I am dealing with a massive banking issue. I simply smiled politely and slipped the thick manila envelope through the narrow gap between the metal bars. I am just doing my civic duty, Marcus, I said, watching his trembling hands take the envelope. Your brilliant lawyer Bradley completely forgot to submit the mandatory post-mediation financial disclosures to the court clerk. The judge gave him until Monday morning to file them or face a contempt charge. Since he was too busy bragging at a barbecue to do his job, I thought it would be neighborly of me to drop them off. Marcus stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words caught in his dry throat. Chloe recovered from her shock and immediately stepped up next to him, grabbing his arm. Marcus, tell her to leave, Chloe demanded, her high-pitched voice grating on my nerves. She insulted me. She said my bracelet was bought with a stolen credit card. Tell her how much you spent on it. Defend me. Marcus flinched violently at the mention of the credit card. He did not defend her. He did not yell at me. He just stood there clutching the manila envelope, looking utterly defeated. His silence spoke louder than any words he could have ever offered. The aunts and uncles leaning against the side gate exchanged confused and concerned glances. The invincible image of Marcus, the wealthy provider, was rapidly disintegrating right in front of their eyes. I stepped back from the gate, adjusting my silk blouse. I looked past the group of panicked people and let my gaze wander over the sprawling property. I looked at the manicured lawn, the expensive patio furniture, and the freshly painted perimeter fence. It was a lovely summer day for a party. I turned my attention back to Marcus, who was still staring at the ground in a daze. Enjoy the party, Marcus, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the warm air. It looks like you spent a lot of money to impress everyone today. But if I can offer one small piece of advice before I leave, you should really consider repainting that perimeter fence. Chloe scoffed loudly. Are you serious? She snapped, crossing her arms defensively. We just painted that fence gray last week. It is modern and chic. What do you know about home decor anyway? I ignored her entirely, keeping my focus locked on Marcus. Gray is certainly a color choice. I continued, my tone completely casual. But the actual owner of this property absolutely hates that shade of gray. And you would not want to upset the landlord, especially when your lease is up for review so very soon. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. I turned on my heel and walked back to the waiting town car without looking back. I opened the door and slid into the cool, air-conditioned leather interior. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the stunned family standing at the gate. But right before the car turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of Bradley standing frozen on the driveway. He had walked down from the patio just in time to hear my final comment about the true owner of the property. As an arrogant man, Bradley was insufferable, but as a corporate lawyer, his instincts were sharp. He watched my car disappear down the street, and then he looked back at the house he had helped Marcus steal. He looked at the gray fence and then at the manila envelope in his brother-in-law's shaking hand. A chilling, overwhelming sense of dread washed over him. He realized in that exact moment that the legal paperwork he had rushed through mediation might not have been the total victory he thought it was. He suddenly remembered the worthless little shell company I had begged to keep. Apex Ventures. The name echoed in his mind like a death knell. The barbecue was officially over. 3 days later, the deposition took place in a downtown law office. The sprawling conference room was a monument to corporate intimidation. It featured a massive polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the city skyline, and expensive leather chairs, designed to make whoever sat in them feel incredibly important. Bradley chose this specific room at his firm to mentally break me. He wanted me to walk in alone and feel completely overwhelmed by the sheer wealth and power radiating from the walls. Marcus sat on one side of the long table, furiously bouncing his leg up and down. His financial world was secretly collapsing, but he was trying his hardest to maintain a facade of absolute control. The corporate audit was still ongoing, and his bank accounts remained entirely frozen. He spent the weekend dodging phone calls from the mortgage lender and ignoring Chloe's endless complaints about her ruined party. He looked over at his brother-in-law. Bradley casually leaned back in his expensive leather chair, sipping a glass of sparkling water and reviewing a thick stack of legal documents. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with anxiety. What if she actually found a way to hire a real lawyer? What if she uses that financial disclosure form to drag this out for months? "I do not have the time or the liquidity to fight a prolonged legal battle right now, Bradley. You know the auditors are breathing down my neck, and Chloe is threatening to leave if I cannot fix my accounts." Bradley laughed, a loud booming sound that echoed in the large, empty room. He set his water glass down and shook his head. "Marcus, you really need to relax," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "She is completely bluffing. That little comment she made at the gate about the fence was just a desperate attempt to get under your skin because she is broke and homeless. She dropped off those disclosure forms herself because she could not even afford a simple courier service. Do you honestly think a woman with $12 in her bank account is going to walk through those doors with high-powered legal representation? She is probably going to show up wearing those same cheap thrift store clothes, begging us to let her keep that worthless little shell company." A young female court reporter sat at the far end of the table, quietly setting up her stenotype machine. She kept her eyes glued to her equipment, pretending not to hear the two men openly mocking the opposing party. "We are going to make her cry today," Bradley continued, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished wood. "I am going to depose her so aggressively she will deeply regret ever showing up to my office. I am going to ask her detailed, humiliating questions about her failed freelance business and her complete lack of financial contribution to your marriage. By the time I am finished with her, she will be begging to sign the final divorce decree just so she can escape this room. We are going to completely crush her spirit, Marcus. You just sit back and let me do all the talking." Marcus let out a long breath and forced a stiff smile. "You are right," he said, running a sweaty hand through his hair. "She is nothing. She has always been nothing. I just want this nightmare over with so I can move on with my life and get my corporate accounts unfrozen. Once this divorce is finalized, the auditors will see that my personal finances are completely separate from whatever mess she created." Bradley checked the heavy gold watch on his wrist. She is exactly 5 minutes late, he noted with an annoyed sigh. Typical unprofessional behavior. I am going to make sure the judge hears about her complete lack of respect for the legal process. This is exactly why she failed in business. She has no concept of time or responsibility. Right as the arrogant words left his mouth, the heavy frosted glass door of the conference room swung open. Marcus and Bradley both looked up, expecting to see me timidly shuffling into the room, clutching my cheap canvas tote bag. They expected to see a broken, defeated woman who was completely ready to surrender to all their ridiculous demands without putting up any fight. I stepped through the doorway, but I did not look defeated. I was wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal gray suit that radiated authority. I carried a sleek leather briefcase, and my posture was perfectly straight. My face was completely devoid of emotion. But the real shock was not my appearance. It was the fact that I was not walking into that room alone. Walking beside me was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a custom-tailored navy pinstripe suit that projected absolute power. He carried a thick leather portfolio under his left arm and walked with the confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. This was Jonathan Sterling, the senior managing partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in the country. He was a legal shark who specialized in destroying fraudulent executives. He was the man who taught advanced corporate law at the university Bradley attended. Jonathan was Bradley's former mentor, and the man Bradley desperately tried and failed to impress years ago. The moment Jonathan crossed the threshold, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The court reporter sat up straighter, recognizing the legal legend instantly. Bradley, however, fell apart. The smug, arrogant grin that had been plastered across his face vanished completely. All the color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He dropped the expensive pen he was spinning between his fingers, and it clattered loudly onto the polished mahogany table. He stared at Jonathan with wide, terrified eyes, his mouth opening and closing silently. Mr. Sterling Bradley finally managed to squeak out, his voice cracking under the sudden immense pressure. "What are you doing here today? Are you in the wrong conference room?" Jonathan stopped at the edge of the table and looked down at his former student with an expression of disappointment. "No, Bradley," Jonathan replied, his deep baritone voice commanding absolute authority. "I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I am here representing my client Maya in this deposition regarding the division of marital assets and the blatant financial fraud committed by your client. I must say, Bradley, when I saw your name on the opposing counsel list, I was concerned. I remember you struggling to comprehend basic fiduciary duty in my classroom, and it appears your grasp of the law has not improved since graduation." Bradley visibly shrank in his expensive leather chair. He swallowed hard, pulling at the collar of his shirt as if it had suddenly become too tight. Marcus, however, was completely oblivious to the massive power shift that had just occurred. He looked back and forth between Bradley and Jonathan, his face twisting with confusion and rising anger. "Wait a minute," Marcus interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. "What is going on here, Bradley? Who is this guy, and why is he talking to you like that?" Marcus turned his furious gaze toward me. "And you, Maya, what kind of game are you playing? This guy is obviously a high-priced suit. I know men like him charge upwards of $1,000 an hour just to answer a simple email. How exactly are you affording him? Did you take out another credit card in my name? Are you committing fraud to pay for a lawyer you cannot afford?" I calmly pulled out one of the heavy leather chairs opposite Marcus and sat down. I placed my sleek briefcase on the table and folded my hands neatly in front of me. I let a slow, confident smile spread across my face. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. "I assure you, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, "I am paying Mr. Sterling entirely out of my personal funds. I have not touched a single dime of your money. In fact, as we are about to discover, you do not have any money left." Marcus sneered, leaning aggressively across the table. "You are lying," he shouted, his face turning red. "You have $12 to your name. You are a broke freelancer who begs for handouts. You are trying to intimidate me, but it is not going to work. Bradley, tell him to sit down. Tell this lawyer that we hold all the leverage and we are not renegotiating. Bradley did not move. He did not speak. He sat there trembling, staring at the thick leather portfolio Jonathan had placed onto the center of the table. Jonathan unbuttoned his suit jacket and took the seat beside me. He opened the heavy portfolio, revealing hundreds of pages of highlighted financial documents, bank statements, and forensic accounting reports. My client is not here to renegotiate anything, Marcus, Jonathan said, pulling a silver pen from his inside pocket. My client is here to expose that you have committed egregious marital fraud, perjury, and illegal dissipation of assets. And Bradley, Jonathan added, turning his piercing gaze toward his terrified former student. I strongly suggest you advise your client to remain silent today, because everything he says from this moment forward will be used to put him in federal prison. The formal deposition will now begin. The formal deposition will now begin, Jonathan stated clearly. He looked over at the court reporter, who gave a quick nod, her fingers hovering over the keys. Jonathan reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a massive black binder that was at least 4 inches thick. He lifted it high enough for everyone to see before dropping it onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud echoed through the silent room like a gavel striking a block. Bradley physically flinched in his chair, his eyes darting toward the thick stack of papers. Marcus swallowed hard but tried to maintain a defiant glare. Let the record show, Jonathan began, his voice echoing with absolute authority, that we are submitting Exhibit A, which contains certified financial records, routing traces, and wire transfer receipts for the marital accounts previously shared by my client Maya and the respondent Marcus. Jonathan flipped open the heavy cover of the binder, revealing meticulously organized pages separated by brightly colored tabs. During the mediation session on the 14th of May, the respondent explicitly claimed that the marital savings were entirely depleted, leaving a joint balance of exactly $12. He testified under oath that he had used the funds to maintain the household. That was a blatant lie. Marcus leaned forward, opening his mouth to object, but Jonathan raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. According to subpoenaed bank records, Jonathan continued turning a page. The respondent began systematically draining the joint savings account exactly 8 months ago. This aligns perfectly with the timeline of when his extramarital affair with Chloe began. He did not spend this money on household maintenance. He executed a series of 42 separate wire transfers, carefully keeping each transaction just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering an automatic banking alert. He thought he was being incredibly clever. Jonathan pulled a specific document from the binder and slid it across the table toward Bradley. Bradley stared at it, but refused to pick it up. He funneled a grand total of $150,000 out of the marital estate, Jonathan declared. And he did not just hide it in a personal offshore account. He established a fraudulent financial vehicle. He created an irrevocable trust fund named the Joyce Family Legacy Trust, listing his mother as the primary beneficiary and himself as the sole trustee. He used his mother's name to launder stolen marital assets right under my client's nose. Marcus turned completely pale. The aggressive red flush in his cheeks vanished, leaving him looking like chalk. How did you get that information? Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. Those accounts are completely sealed. Nothing is sealed when it involves federal marital fraud, Jonathan replied coldly, not missing a beat. But the fraudulent trust is only the first part of this crime. We also tracked exactly where that stolen $150,000 went. It did not stay in the trust account for very long, did it, Marcus? Jonathan flipped to the next tab in the binder and pulled out a copy of a real estate deed. On the 3rd of April, the respondent authorized a massive wire transfer from the Joyce Family Legacy Trust to an escrow account held by a luxury real estate brokerage downtown. He used the stolen marital funds to pay the entire cash down payment for a high-rise luxury condominium. He then signed as the financial guarantor for the mortgage. And the sole resident listed on the deed for that condominium is his mistress Chloe. The silence in the room was absolute. The court reporter typed furiously, capturing every single damning word. Marcus looked as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of his lungs. He slumped back in his chair, staring blankly at the polished wood table. His carefully constructed web of lies had just been completely dismantled in less than 5 minutes. He had stolen from his wife, implicated his own mother in a financial crime, and bought a luxury property for his mistress, using traceable funds. Every single transaction was documented, time-stamped, and verified by federal banking authorities. He had nowhere left to hide. The arrogance that had fueled his entire existence for the past 5 years was completely evaporating. He looked over at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He had spent months convincing himself that I was just a clueless freelancer who was too blind to notice his financial manipulation. He had bragged to his entire family about leaving me with nothing but a $50,000 credit card bill. Now the reality of his situation was crashing down around him. He realized that I had quietly gathered the evidence to absolutely destroy his life. Bradley watched his brother-in-law completely fall apart in front of him. The terrifying realization that his own legal career was now intimately tied to a massive federal fraud case finally pierced through his arrogant skull. He could not let this happen. He needed to regain control of the room before Jonathan reported him to the ethics board. Bradley suddenly slammed both of his hands flat against the mahogany table. The loud smack made Marcus jump, but Jonathan and I did not even blink. "Listen to me right now," Bradley shouted, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is nothing but a desperate shakedown. You can wave all the bank statements you want in our faces, but it does not change the fundamental truth of this marriage. Marcus earned every single penny of that money. He worked grueling 60-hour weeks building a lucrative career while you sat around the house doing absolutely nothing. You have zero work ethic, Maya. You come from a culture of people who are always looking for a handout and expecting a free ride on the backs of successful, hardworking men." Jonathan tightened his grip on his pen and leaned forward to object to the blatantly racist language, but I held up my hand and stopped him. I did not need my lawyer to defend my honor. I wanted to handle this arrogant man myself. "You did not contribute a single dollar to the marital estate," Bradley continued, his voice echoing loudly off the glass walls. "You were perfectly content to be lazy and drain his resources. Taking that money and placing it into a trust for his mother was not fraud. It was simply my client reallocating his own hard-earned assets to protect them from a woman who brings absolutely no value to the table. We will argue that in front of any judge, and we will win, because the law protects the primary earner from predatory spouses like you." I let out a slow, humorless laugh that immediately cut off his unhinged rant. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, and locked my eyes directly onto his. "You really are the most incompetent lawyer I have ever met," I said, my voice dangerously calm and precise. "You are sitting here trying to justify grand larceny with coded racist insults because you have absolutely no valid legal defense. But since you want to talk about the law, let us talk about the law, Bradley." I opened my own leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward him. "Let us talk about the Uniform Voidable Transactions Act," Y said, watching his eyes drop to the paper. "Under state family law, any income earned during the marriage is considered community property, regardless of whose name is on the paycheck. By transferring $150,000 of community property into an irrevocable trust without my written spousal consent, Marcus committed blatant marital fraud. That is a fact, not an opinion." Bradley swallowed hard, his throat visibly bobbing. "But the real problem for you, Bradley, is not what Marcus did." I continued, my voice growing sharper with every single word. "The real problem for you is how he did it. You are the registered attorney of record for the Joyce Family Legacy Trust. Your signature is right there on the bottom line of the founding documents. You legally drafted the paperwork to help your brother-in-law hide stolen marital assets. You facilitated the transfer of community property to a third party to purchase real estate for his mistress. I paused, letting the absolute gravity of my words sink into his terrified mind. You did not just provide bad legal counsel, Bradley. You actively aided and abetted financial fraud. That is a direct violation of the American Bar Association rules of professional conduct. You knowingly participated in a criminal conspiracy to defraud a spouse. When we hand this massive binder over to the state disciplinary board, they are not just going to suspend your law license. They are going to disbar you completely. And when the federal authorities realize you helped launder money across state lines, you will be facing the exact same prison sentence as your client. Bradley sank back into his heavy leather chair, as if all the bones in his body had suddenly evaporated. His mouth hung open, but he could not form a single word. He looked helplessly at Jonathan, desperately hoping his former mentor would jump in and correct my legal analysis. But Jonathan simply smiled and gave a slow, approving nod. My assessment was perfectly accurate. Bradley had truly dug his own grave trying to bury me today. Jonathan allowed the heavy silence to stretch for a few moments, letting the reality of impending disbarment settle over Bradley. He then reached back into his leather portfolio and pulled out a single, neatly typed document. "We have established that your client committed fraud," Jonathan said, his tone shifting back to the cold precision of a corporate litigator. "But we are not finished here today. There is one more matter regarding the division of assets that requires immediate clarification." Jonathan slid the document across the mahogany table. It came to a stop right in front of the paralyzed lawyer. "This is a formal subpoena and a motion to unseal the complete financial records of a specific limited liability company," Jonathan explained. "During the mediation session on the 14th of May, your client graciously allowed my client to retain sole ownership of an entity known as Apex Ventures. He did this under the mistaken assumption that the company held zero value and was merely a failed vanity project." Bradley stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. His hands were shaking so violently that he had to press them flat against the table to steady himself. He slowly leaned forward and began to read the first page of the motion. I watched his eyes scan the black ink. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the legal terminology and the attached financial summaries. A sharp gasp escaped Bradley's lips. All the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. His fingers went completely numb, and the expensive silver pen he was still holding slipped from his grasp. It hit the polished mahogany table with a loud clatter and rolled onto the carpet. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute shock and pure terror. He finally understood the magnitude of his massive legal blunder. "What is this?" Bradley whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "This cannot be real. This has to be a typographical error. There is an extra zero here. There are several extra zeros here. This is legally impossible." Marcus, who had been sitting in stunned silence, suddenly snapped back to reality. He saw his arrogant lawyer completely crumbling, and his panic quickly morphed into aggressive frustration. "What is going on?" Marcus demanded, slamming his hand on the table again. "What is that paper, Bradley? Stop acting like a scared child and tell me what they are trying to pull now. We are the ones in control here." Bradley could not speak. He just kept shaking his head, staring blindly at the document. Marcus let out an angry growl and reached across the table. He aggressively snatched the paper right out from under Bradley's nose. "Give me that," Marcus snapped, bringing the document closer to his face. "You are letting them manipulate you with fake legal threats. Let me see what kind of garbage they printed out." Marcus began to read the motion. He read the official letterhead from the federal tax court. He read the request to unseal the blind trust protecting the corporate assets. And then his eyes reached the attached schedule of holdings for Apex Ventures. I sat perfectly still and watched the arrogant, confident man I once married completely shatter into a million pieces. His eyes darted back and forth across the page, reading the numbers over and over again. He read the list of commercial real estate properties owned by the holding company. He read the quarterly dividend reports. He read the current market valuation of the entity he had gleefully signed away just 2 weeks prior when he thought he was punishing me with credit card debt. Apex Ventures was not a worthless shell company with zero profits. It was a massive corporate holding firm, and the valuation listed on the official court document was staggering. No, Marcus breathed out, his voice tight and shallow. No, this is impossible. You do not have this kind of money, Maya. You are a freelancer. You work from the kitchen table. You have $12 in the bank. I smiled gently, leaning back in my chair. I do work from the kitchen table, Marcus, I replied calmly. But I do not freelance. I am the sole founder of a venture capital firm. I quietly invested in commercial real estate early in our marriage. I protected my assets using a blind trust because of your reckless spending habits. I legally structured Apex Ventures to report zero personal income to me. You never asked about my work because you never respected me. Marcus stared at the paper, his hands trembling violently. He saw the estimated valuation of $20 million. He looked at his own signature, completely surrendering all claims. He had signed away something monstrous. 2 weeks after that devastating deposition, we walked into the grand courtroom for the final divorce hearing. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us, sealing Marcus and his arrogant family inside. The courtroom was vast and intimidating, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Sitting high on the bench was the Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense black woman with a reputation for destroying unprepared lawyers. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket with a sharp, piercing gaze. Marcus looked physically ill. The last 14 days had aged him 10 years. His skin was pale and his expensive tailored suit hung loosely on his frame because he had lost so much weight from the sheer panic. He sat at the respondent's table, staring blankly ahead. Right behind him, sitting in the public gallery, was his mistress, Chloe. She was completely clueless about the financial apocalypse that had already destroyed her boyfriend's life. She was wearing another expensive designer outfit, casually checking her manicured nails and loudly popping her chewing gum. Next to her sat Mama Joyce, who was glaring daggers at my back. Mama Joyce smoothed her dress and sat up straight, fully expecting the judge to finalize my complete financial ruin today. I sat perfectly still at the petitioner's table. Jonathan sat right beside me, exuding absolute confidence. He calmly arranged his thick legal folders on the desk. He did not look like a man preparing for a fight. He looked like an executioner preparing to pull a lever. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, demanding silence. Judge Vance folded her hands on her desk and looked directly at Bradley. I see we are here to finalize the mediated settlement agreement signed by both parties last month. Judge Vance began, her voice echoing in the large room. Is there any reason we cannot proceed with the final decree today? Before she even finished her sentence, Bradley practically leaped out of his chair. He was sweating profusely and his hands were shaking so badly he dropped his legal pad on the floor. Your Honor, Bradley stammered, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. The respondent urgently requests to file an emergency motion to completely void the previously signed mediation agreement. We are officially petitioning the court to throw out the entire contract immediately. A loud gasp echoed from the gallery. Mama Joyce leaned forward, gripping the wooden railing in shock. Chloe stopped popping her gum and looked around in utter confusion. They had no idea why Bradley's tone was so desperate. They thought the agreement was their ultimate victory. Judge Vance narrowed her eyes and picked up a pen. On what grounds, counselor? She asked, her tone dripping with intense skepticism. Both parties signed this document voluntarily. Furthermore, you were the attorney of record representing the respondent during that mediation. Are you telling this court that you allowed your client to sign a legally binding document that you now wish to invalidate? Yes, Your Honor. Bradley choked out, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. We are claiming gross misrepresentation and fraud on the part of the petitioner. My client was maliciously tricked into signing away his marital rights to a specific business entity known as Apex Ventures. The petitioner deliberately concealed the true astronomical value of this holding company. She led us to believe it was a completely worthless asset with zero profits. We were severely defrauded, Your Honor, and we demand a full, equitable division of that $20 million corporate asset. The moment the words $20 million left Bradley's mouth, the entire courtroom descended into absolute chaos. Chloe let out a loud, piercing shriek, dropping her expensive handbag onto the floor. Mama Joyce jumped out of her seat screaming my name in pure disbelief before the bailiff ordered her to sit down and remain silent. Marcus just buried his face in his trembling hands, unable to look at his family. Judge Vance slammed her heavy wooden gavel repeatedly until the room finally fell completely quiet again. She glared at the gallery, threatening to clear the room if another sound was made. She then turned her fierce gaze back down to the sweating lawyer standing before her. "You are making a very serious accusation of financial fraud," Counselor Judge Vance warned, her voice dangerously low. "But before we entertain this emergency motion, I need you to clarify something for the official court record. During this mediation session, did you or did you not demand that the petitioner assume $50,000 of marital debt in exchange for keeping this allegedly worthless company?" Bradley swallowed hard, his throat completely dry and his body shaking with intense fear. "Yes, Your Honor. We absolutely did," he whispered quietly. Judge Vance leaned back in her high leather chair and folded her hands, resting them beneath her chin. She stared at Bradley with a look of absolute disgust. "So, let me make sure I understand the sequence of events," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "You sat in a mediation room. You drafted a legally binding settlement. You aggressively demanded that the petitioner assume $50,000 of your client's personal credit card debt. And in exchange, you allowed her to keep a company that you yourselves deemed entirely worthless. Now, 2 weeks later, you are standing in my courtroom demanding I throw out your own contract because you suddenly realized the company has actual value." Bradley nodded frantically, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Yes, Your Honor," he pleaded. "We were deceived." She hid the true nature of the business. Jonathan stood up smoothly, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. "Your Honor," Jonathan said, his deep voice cutting through the tension in the room. "If I may address the court regarding opposing counsel's ridiculous allegations of fraud. I have here a certified copy of the complete financial disclosures and the unsealed corporate registry for Apex Ventures. We filed this motion to unseal the records specifically to put an end to this circus." Judge Vance extended her hand. The bailiff stepped forward, took the thick file folder from Jonathan, and handed it up to the bench. The courtroom was completely silent. The only sound was the rustling of heavy paper as the judge flipped open the file and began to read. I watched her eyes scan the first page, then she flipped to the second page. Her eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. She adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the document, reading the attached financial schedules and the corporate ownership structure. For a long moment, Judge Vance did not say a single word. She looked up from the file and stared directly at me. Her stern expression softened for just a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of profound respect. She then turned her gaze back to the respondents' table. When she looked at Bradley, her eyes were filled with pure judicial fury. Counselor Judge Vance said, her voice echoing like thunder. "Did you do any basic legal due diligence before you sat down at that mediation table? Did you perform a standard corporate background check on this entity?" Bradley gripped the wooden edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. "We ran a basic search, Your Honor," he stammered. "The company showed zero personal income distributions to the petitioner. We assumed it was just a failed freelance consulting firm." "You assumed," Judge Vance repeated, slamming her hand down flat against her desk. "You are a corporate attorney and you simply assumed. Tell me, counselor, are you completely unaware of her real identity? Do you have any idea who is sitting across the aisle from you right now?" Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Marcus looked up at the judge, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. Chloe and Mama Joyce leaned forward in the gallery, completely captivated by the unfolding disaster. Since you clearly failed to do your job, I am going to make you do it right now, Judge Vance commanded. She handed the thick file back to the bailiff. Hand this copy to opposing counsel, she ordered. The bailiff walked over and dropped the heavy file right in front of Bradley. Judge Vance pointed a stern finger at the trembling lawyer. Open that file to page 42. Judge Vance instructed her tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. I want you to read the first 3 paragraphs of that page out loud. I want it entered into the official court record, exactly what you willingly signed away on behalf of your client today. Bradley stared at the closed folder like it was a live explosive device. His hands shook violently as he reached out and flipped the heavy cover open. He clumsily turned the thick pages, his breathing shallow and rapid. He finally reached page 42. The paper rattled loudly in his trembling hands. Read it, Counselor, Judge Vance barked. Bradley swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. He looked down at the black ink and began to read, his voice barely more than a terrified whisper. Pursuant to the corporate registry of the state, Apex Ventures is hereby designated as a primary holding corporation. He read, pausing to gasp for air. The sole managing director and majority shareholder holding 100% equity is the petitioner Maya. Keep reading, Judge Vance demanded, leaning forward over the bench. Read the asset valuation out loud for everyone in this courtroom. Now. Bradley wiped a bead of sweat from his chin and looked back down at the page. The current estimated market valuation of all combined assets under the Apex Ventures portfolio is... He choked on the next few words, his vocal cords completely seizing up under the immense pressure of the room. Speak up, Counselor. Judge Vance snapped, her patience entirely gone. $20,450,000. Bradley forced the words out in a single breathless rush. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Even the stoic bailiff raised an eyebrow. Marcus gripped the edge of his table, his knuckles turning bone white. He stared at me as if I were a stranger, a terrifying phantom who had just materialized in the courtroom. Continue reading, Judge Vance ordered, leaning back with a look of severe satisfaction. Read the list of primary subsidiaries and commercial real estate holdings. I want the respondent to fully understand exactly what he agreed to forfeit during your mediation session. Bradley's hands shook so violently the thick paper made a loud rustling sound in the quiet room. Apex Ventures holds majority ownership in a diverse portfolio of commercial properties and tech startups. Key real estate holdings include... He paused, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he read the next line silently to himself. Read it, the judge commanded, her voice echoing loudly. Including the premier commercial high-rise located at 400 West Plaza. Bradley, said, his voice dropping to a hollow, trembling whisper. Marcus shot up from his chair, the heavy wooden legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. That is impossible, he shouted, all protocol completely forgotten. 400 West Plaza is my corporate headquarters. My office is in that building. You are telling me my broke wife owns the building my company leases. Sit down right now, Judge Vance roared, slamming her gavel violently. Or I will hold you in contempt and have you wait in a holding cell. Marcus slowly sank back into his chair, his mind completely broken. He had spent the last 5 years acting like the king of his corporate castle, treating me like a peasant who was lucky to eat his scraps. Now he was discovering that the very ground his corporate tower sat upon belonged entirely to me. I was his landlord. I was the silent entity his arrogant chief executive officer complained about during tense lease negotiations. Keep going, Counselor. Judge Vance said, her eyes locked directly on Marcus. Finish the list. Bradley swallowed hard, his face completely devoid of all color. Additional holdings include the downtown luxury residential tower located at 800 Park Avenue. This time it was Chloe who reacted violently. She shrieked, jumping up from the wooden gallery bench. Wait a minute, she yelled, completely ignoring the strict rules of the court. 800 Park Avenue is my building. That is where Marcus bought my new luxury condo. She cannot own my building. That is completely illegal. Bailiff, remove that woman from my courtroom immediately. Judge Vance barked, pointing a firm finger toward the back doors. The armed bailiff marched over, grabbed Chloe by the arm, and physically escorted the screaming, thrashing woman out into the long hallway. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her high-pitched, arrogant protests. Mama Joyce sat frozen in her seat, her mouth hanging open, looking as though she might faint at any given moment. Jonathan stood up smoothly, adjusting his tailored jacket. Your Honor, just to clarify the record, my client is not a failed freelance consultant, as opposing counsel has repeatedly and maliciously claimed. Maya is a highly successful venture capitalist. She specialized in distressed asset acquisition long before she met the respondent. Because she recognized his severe financial irresponsibility, early in the marriage she utilized a perfectly legal blind trust to protect her investments. She purposely structured Apex Ventures to yield zero personal income to herself, to shield her assets from his reckless spending habits. I looked directly at Marcus across the wide aisle. His eyes were red, and a single tear of pure humiliation rolled slowly down his cheek. He had spent years bragging about his six-figure salary, completely unaware he was sleeping next to a multimillionaire. He had mocked my simple clothes, unaware they were custom-tailored stealth wealth pieces. He had laughed at my empty bank accounts, completely blind to the fact that those accounts were merely decoys. He thought he had financially starved me out of our marriage. Instead, he had willingly signed away his legal right to a massive corporate empire just to punish me with a $50,000 credit card debt. His greed and his desperate need to feel superior had entirely blinded him to the undeniable hard truth. The courtroom remained perfectly still as the sheer magnitude of my wealth settled over the room. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses and looked down at the emergency motion Bradley had desperately filed just minutes prior. She picked up the document between her index finger and thumb as if it were contaminated with a severe disease. She dropped it back onto her heavy oak desk with a loud, sharp slap. Your motion to void the mediation agreement is completely denied. Judge Vance announced, her voice cutting through the heavy air with absolute finality. You came into my courtroom today, hoping to finalize a contract you believed would leave the petitioner entirely destitute. You sat there smugly demanding she take on $50,000 of your personal debt, while you walked away with the marital home. You only cried fraud when you discovered your own profound ignorance cost you access to a $20 million empire. The court does not reward such monumental stupidity, counselor. Bradley slumped down in his chair, completely defeated and broken. Marcus, however, could not accept his terrifying new fate. He stood up again, his hands trembling wildly. Your Honor, you cannot do this, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. She lied to me for 5 years. She hid millions of dollars while I paid the daily household bills. I am legally entitled to half of those assets under state community property laws. You have to grant me an equitable division of that holding company. It is only fair. Judge Vance fixed him with a glare so intense it made him instantly stop talking. You are entitled to absolutely nothing, she replied coldly. You seem to have conveniently forgotten the massive financial fraud you just committed. You systematically stole $150,000 of marital funds. You funneled that money into a fraudulent trust under your mother's name to buy luxury real estate for your mistress. You then sat in a legal mediation and perjured yourself by claiming those joint accounts were empty. She leaned forward, pointing her wooden gavel directly at his chest. Under the established legal doctrine of clean hands, you forfeit any right to seek equitable relief from this court. Judge Vance continued, her words striking him like physical blows. You cannot commit blatant financial crimes to defraud your spouse and then beg the court for a fair share of her corporate assets when you realize you played a losing game. Furthermore, the blind trust protecting Apex Ventures is legally ironclad. It was established before your marriage specifically to protect the petitioner's assets from someone exactly like you. You will not see a single penny of her wealth. Marcus grabbed his chest as if he was having severe trouble breathing. He looked at Bradley, begging his lawyer to do something, but Bradley refused to even make eye contact. The judge was not finished destroying his life. She picked up her pen and turned to the final page of the divorce decree. Regarding the division of remaining marital liabilities, Judge Vance declared her tone strictly business. During mediation, the respondent maliciously attempted to force the petitioner to assume $50,000 of credit card debt. This debt was accrued entirely by the respondent to fund his extramarital affair and purchase luxury items for his mistress. Due to the egregious nature of your financial misconduct, I am ruling that the respondent Marcus is solely responsible for 100% of that massive balance. Marcus let out a loud, choked sob. Your Honor, please, he begged, gripping the heavy wooden table to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. My corporate accounts are completely frozen because of a forensic audit. I do not have $50,000. I do not even have enough cash to pay the mortgage on the house next month. If you saddle me with this crushing debt, I will be completely bankrupt before the end of the week. That sounds like a personal problem that you created with your own deceit, Judge Vance replied, completely unmoved by his pathetic tears. You wanted the house, and you fought aggressively for it. Now you can figure out how to pay for it yourself. The final divorce decree is approved exactly as modified by this court today. The petitioner retains sole ownership of her corporate holding company. The respondent assumes all marital debt and forfeits any claim to spousal support. She signed her name at the bottom of the page with a forceful stroke of her pen. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was leaving with a massive mountain of debt, a frozen bank account, and an impending corporate investigation. He lost absolutely everything. Mama Joyce sat frozen behind him, watching his world completely fall apart. Judge Vance banged her gavel one final time. We are adjourned, she announced, retreating to her chambers. The bailiff unlocked the side door and followed her, leaving the ruined family to sit in the wreckage of their arrogant creation. I stood up slowly, smoothing my charcoal gray suit. I reached into my sleek briefcase and pulled out a single crisp white envelope. It was sealed with a red wax stamp bearing the corporate crest of the parent company that owned his sales firm. I walked calmly across the center aisle. Marcus was still slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the polished floor. Bradley was frantically packing his legal pads, refusing to look up. Mama Joyce remained entirely paralyzed in the gallery, her mouth still hanging open in absolute shock. I stopped right in front of the respondent's table and dropped the envelope directly onto his trembling hands. Marcus flinched as if the paper burned his skin. He looked up at me with red-rimmed, tear-filled eyes. What is this? He whispered, his voice entirely broken. Is this another lawsuit, Maya? Have you not taken absolutely everything from me today? I looked at him, feeling absolutely no pity. Open it, Marcus, I commanded, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Read your future. His shaking fingers broke the red wax seal. He pulled out the single sheet of thick corporate stationery. He read the bold black text at the top of the page. Notice of immediate termination with cause. His eyes frantically scanned the paragraphs below, detailing his gross embezzlement. The fraudulent expense reports, the $10,000 diamond bracelet he wrote off as a client gift, and the immediate suspension of all his corporate benefits. You are fired, Marcus, I said, my tone completely devoid of emotion. As the majority shareholder of the parent company, I personally reviewed the preliminary findings from the forensic audit. You stole from my company to fund your pathetic little affair. You are completely terminated, effective immediately. Furthermore, Corporate Human Resources has already forwarded the embezzlement evidence to the federal authorities. You will be facing severe criminal charges by the end of the week. You are officially ruined. Marcus dropped the letter, his jaw trembling as he let out a loud, pathetic sob. He buried his face in his hands, weeping openly in front of his paralyzed mother. While Marcus cried, Jonathan stepped forward and stood directly in front of the sweating, panicked lawyer. Bradley had his briefcase half-zipped, desperately trying to escape the room. Jonathan reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a formal legal notice, slipping it onto the table right over Bradley's messy files. "What is this?" Bradley stammered, taking a terrified step backward. "That is a formal notification of a grievance filed with the State Bar Association," Jonathan replied, his deep voice laced with absolute disgust. "We are officially reporting you for severe ethical violations, gross incompetence, and actively aiding your client in committing federal financial fraud. I personally spoke with the disciplinary committee this morning. They are opening a full investigation into your entire legal practice. You should probably start looking for a new career, Bradley, because you will never practice law in this state ever again." Bradley collapsed back into his chair, clutching his chest as he hyperventilated. His arrogant smirk was gone forever, replaced by the terrifying realization that his entire livelihood was completely destroyed. Jonathan and I turned away from the pathetic men and walked down the center aisle. Mama Joyce refused to make eye contact, staring blankly at the floor as we passed her. We pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the brightly lit corridor. Chloe was pacing frantically outside the courtroom, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The moment she saw me, she marched forward, her face twisted in rage. "What did you do in there?" she screamed, her high-pitched voice echoing down the long marble hallway. "What did you do to Marcus? You are just a bitter, broke freelancer trying to ruin his life because he upgraded to a real woman." I stopped walking and looked her up and down, taking in her fake confidence. "I am not a freelancer, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "I am the sole owner of Apex Ventures, which means I own the luxury residential tower located at 800 Park Avenue. The building where Marcus bought your beautiful new condo with stolen money." Chloe's face instantly dropped. Her mouth opened, but she could not speak. "By the way," I continued, offering a cold, predatory smile, "the property manager taped an immediate eviction notice to your front door an hour ago. You have until midnight to pack your cheap clothes and vacate my property. Have a wonderful life, Chloe." Chloe stood completely paralyzed in the marble hallway. Her designer handbag crashed onto the floor. The reality of her immediate homelessness washed over her empty expression. Before she could even process the magnitude of her ruined life, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom burst open. Mama Joyce stumbled out into the corridor, looking like a woman who had just survived a horrific shipwreck. Her large, extravagant church hat was sitting crookedly on her head, and her face was streaked with dark, ruined makeup. She saw me standing near the elevators with Jonathan, and she immediately sprinted toward us. Her high heels echoed frantically against the polished stone. "Maya, wait!" she screamed, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Please, wait just a minute." She lunged forward, reaching out with trembling hands to grab my arms, but Jonathan swiftly stepped between us. He held up a single firm hand, forcing the frantic older woman to stop completely in her tracks. Mama Joyce ignored the lawyer and looked around him, locking her tearful eyes directly onto mine. "Maya, you cannot do this to us," she pleaded, sobbing uncontrollably. "You are destroying my family. Marcus is your husband. We are your family. You know he is a good man deep down. He just made a foolish mistake. He was confused and led astray by that terrible girl over there." She pointed a shaking finger at Chloe, who immediately gasped in offended outrage. "You cannot take his job and leave him with all that terrible debt," Mama Joyce continued, weeping loudly. "He is just a boy, Maya. Please show some grace. We can fix this. We can go to counseling and put our family back together." I looked at the pathetic weeping woman and felt absolutely nothing. I stepped around Jonathan and looked directly down into her desperate eyes. I did not raise my voice, but my words cut through the hallway like a freshly sharpened blade. "Marcus is not a boy, Mama Joyce," I said, my tone dropping to a chilling surgical whisper. "He is a fully grown man who made a series of calculated, malicious choices. He chose to lie. He chose to steal. He chose to humiliate me, and you sat right there and cheered for him while he did it. You stood in my bedroom 2 weeks ago and told me I was a fatherless street rat who was dragging your precious successful son down. You praised the very same mistress you are now desperately trying to blame. You wanted me ruined and homeless. Mama Joyce opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand and silenced her instantly. You do not get to play the family card now that the deck is completely stacked against you. I continued, stepping closer so she could hear every single word clearly. You spent 20 years letting your own husband disrespect you, and you expected me to carry that exact same generational curse. You wanted me to shrink myself to protect a weak, insecure man just like you did. But I am not you, Mama Joyce. I refuse to carry your dead weight. I refuse to finance your delusions of grandeur. I broke the cycle, and I am protecting my peace. You wanted a son who matched his fly. Well, now you have him. He is broke, unemployed, and facing federal indictment. You two deserve absolutely everything that is coming to you. I turned away and pressed the elevator button. The hallway erupted into a screaming match. Chloe marched over and began shrieking at Mama Joyce, calling her a hypocritical enabler. Marcus stumbled out of the courtroom, and Chloe immediately turned her absolute fury onto him, demanding he fix her housing situation. Bradley followed closely behind, looking pale and sickly, as he muttered frantically to himself about losing his law license. They were tearing each other apart, like a pack of starving wolves, turning on their own, completely consumed by the toxic greed they had so proudly cultivated. The stainless steel elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside with Jonathan and pressed the button for the lobby. I did not look back at the chaos echoing down the corridor. The heavy doors glided shut, cutting off the sounds of their misery entirely. I walked out the front glass doors of the grand courthouse and stepped into the warm, bright afternoon sunlight. A sleek black Maybach idled flawlessly at the curb. My chauffeur stood ready, holding the rear passenger door open for me. I slipped into the pristine leather interior and breathed in the quiet scent of absolute victory. The engine hummed softly as the luxury vehicle pulled away, leaving the courthouse and my ruined former family far behind in the rearview mirror. The game was officially over. The most profound takeaway from this narrative is the undeniable reality that true power whispers while deep insecurity screams. Throughout the ordeal, we witness a stark contrast between two completely different approaches to personal value. On one side, there is a desperate need for external validation fueled by stolen money, flashy logos, and loud, arrogant boasting. This loud lifestyle is inherently fragile because it relies entirely on the shallow perception of others rather than a solid foundation of authentic achievement. On the other side, we see the quiet, unshakable confidence of absolute financial and emotional independence. Real, lasting success never needs to announce its presence or belittle others to feel important. By choosing to operate in total silence and refusing to engage in petty ego battles, you can clearly observe the true character of those around you. When toxic people believe you have absolutely nothing, they quickly reveal exactly who they are and how poorly they treat others. This quiet approach provides the ultimate tactical advantage, allowing you to build an impenetrable fortress while your adversaries carelessly dig their own graves through sheer arrogance. It is incredibly easy to get swept up in the modern societal pressure to constantly prove your worth to people who do not genuinely care about your well-being. However, remember that the ultimate personal victory always lies in radical emotional detachment and meticulous strategic planning. Protecting your peace means recognizing that you do not owe anyone an explanation of your immense value. Just let the toxic individuals in your life completely underestimate you, while you silently build an incredible reality they could never even fathom. Take a very hard and honest look at your inner circle today and start quietly investing in your absolute financial independence before giving anyone the power to dictate your worth.